is, there we go. Now, can everybody see my slides? Matt, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, Tawni, thank you. All right, so here we go. How can economics illuminate history? This is an introduction to chapter 1. And what I'm going to do is, well, and Scott, would you kind of monitor the chat? I don't have easy access to the chat in this when I've got the full screen up here.
Yep, I'll keep an eye on it,
So,
Mark.
okay, and then as questions come along, just let me know and we'll go from there. So we're going to talk about problems teaching American history. We're going to do an introduction to the economic way of thinking. So this is choices, costs, incentives, institutions, or rules of the game. That is how economic institutions influence choices and incentives. We're going to talk about gains from trade. We're going to talk about primary and secondary effects. And then I've got one little teaching suggestion right at the end for social studies teachers. So, problems teaching US history. For one thing, most schools around the country provide for a fair amount of US history, up to 6 semesters. And schools rely on US history. I mean, that's not an accident. Kids take 2 semesters of biology. They take 6 semesters of US history if the school district does it at every grade that they traditionally do it in. Well, clearly people who planned this years ago think this is important for our national identity, for everyone to have some commonality. It's also an important academic subject. It's important to know the context that you're working in. And to understand the world, you need, one of the big issues always is to know about the past and how you got to where you are today. But we're often criticized. Some people say the content's boring. Some people say the pedagogy is boring. I kind of disagree with that. I think the content's wonderful. But, you know, there it is. Some people say it's superficial. Yeah, I kind of get that. It's true that sometimes we skate over things and you kind of are remembering various facts, but you're not going into enough depth to really understand it. You know, I mean, how many days can you spend teaching World War II? I mean, you probably want to spend a lot of days teaching World War II, but sometimes you wind up kind of skating over it more lightly and not able to give it the attention you'd like. Trivial. I kind of disagree with this, but some people say it's a kind of a trivial pursuits thing, and we spend too much time on dates and events. You know, again, I sort of disagree with that. I think dates and events are really important, but I get it. Some people say it's remote. Well, you know, it's school. You know, we're here to learn things that are not in our current environment. You know, and I've never been to Vietnam, but I think I know a reasonable amount of Vietnam. And Vietnam's remote, but I know something about it. I could talk about its history. I could talk about where it's located. I could talk about its economy, but it's remote. Okay, so we do a lot of things in school that are remote, and I guess history is one of them that's a little hard to get kids connected to it, and rarely focused on why. I think this is a really important point that I think when you look at your standard history books, the authors sort of dance around a little bit. And part of it is restricted by standards and things like that, but rather to say something really definitive. And I think economic historians are a little more willing to be a little more definitive in a little more precise in stating cause and effect, for example. So there is usually a fair amount of history. I've alluded to this. You're in a traditional school curriculum. There's 2 semesters of grade 5. 2 semesters of grade 8 and 2 semesters of grade 11. Now, some schools have moved that 8 and 11 closer together. I got that. But the national test data really is a little sad. We actually declined in the last US history assessment from 18% to 15%. So I don't know if you can see my screen moving around there, but you know, so we spend 6 semesters and yet we get dismal results. So maybe the economics aspect might help. So that's that, and we actually have a little research that says that might be the case. And we also see we have a lot of course taking. That's 72% there of 8th graders take a U.S. history course, and we're still not seeing. You know, there could be some other issues going on with why we're not seeing good national results. But you know, it it is pretty weak. I mean, we're not doing it. Civics and geography are not doing great either, but they're doing better than U.S. history. Okay, so here's the book. It's called Economic Episodes in American History. The second edition actually has 2 covers. You're getting the Jamestown cover. That's this one here. And there's a student book. Scott, we have to remember to do this. We have to send you the teacher's guide. Julie is on, and Julie, we need to send you a copy of the teacher's guide so everybody gets that. There is, at the Wool website, there's something called the Test of Economic Thinking. So if you want to measure if you're doing like a master's degree or something and you would like to do a little research, or you just are interested in measuring economic thinking with your kids, we have a test there. And we also, if we were doing this in person, we'd be giving you a poster, but the poster is at woolpublishing.com, and you can get a copy of it there. So now here we're gonna do a little participation, and I'm gonna count on my buddy Scott here to help me with the chat. Now I lost, no, there it went. Okay. So imagine you're planning a new unit on the Civil Rights Movement. All right. Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, Voters' Rights Act, and so forth. What main concepts? Now, if you're going to be teaching it from a historical perspective, what main concepts would you tend to stress? If you were teaching it from a geographical perspective, what concepts would you tend to stress or principles? If you were teaching it from an economic perspective, what principles? So let me see. I can't get to the chat. At least I don't know how. So let's see.
Mark, if you go down to the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, my screen is full. I'd have to.
So go to the top, actually, then.
Yeah, the top. Here we are.
By the way, Mark, I noticed a few are mentioning they're getting the American flag book, which that's okay. It's the same exact book. We just have a different cover. So I think the publisher probably ran out of the Jamestown ones and then gone to the new one. So the book's exactly the same, just a different cover. So no problem there, Brian. It's the same exact book.
Okay. So Scott, do we have any comments on history or geography or economics?
So history mentioned voting rights, 14th Amendment, Supreme Court cases, impact of Reconstruction, geographic North and South.
Very good. I'm showing you a map here of the events of the Civil Rights Movement. These were the buses, the freedom buses and freedom marches. Go ahead, Scott.
Geography, Great Migration, slavery, Jim Crow, power of boycotts, impact of GI Bill. Economics, the Great Migration, economics, impact of sit-ins and boycotts, geography, spread of slavery, a lot of the same sort of things.
But are there, what you're naming are events, and that's all great stuff. But are there any concepts or principles out there that you would stress? Well, if you were looking at this from a historical perspective, well, let's see, you'd be talking about chronology, right? All those things that you were listing would essentially be in chronology. And when you're talking about geography, as the map implies, you're talking about place and location, right? Those are things we often see in state standards. When you're talking about economics, we'd be talking about choices and incentives. So why did the Civil Rights Movement happen at that time? Why didn't it happen at some other time? We have a chapter in the book that talks about the desegregation of Major League Baseball in 1947 with Jackie Robinson. Well, why did that happen in 1947? Way, 20 years ahead of the Civil Rights Movement. Well, it had to do with choices and incentives and competition. Well, it's a bit of a world filled with mystery. So let's look at you for just a minute. Oh, okay, this is supposed to be it says Wisconsin teachers. It's all of the teachers from Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and Indiana and Florida. Yeah, what a year, right? You've had to learn a lot of new technology, figure out how to plan a lot of new lessons, spend endless hours on Zoom calls, learn how to stay safe in school. And with all of this going on in your life, why would you burn up a Saturday, the larger part of a Saturday, to be with us, who are going to talk about the economic way of thinking, maybe something that you've been trying to avoid for a long time? All right. So it's an interesting problem. So there's a lot of mystery. So you're not the only mysterious one. There's a lot of mysteries out here. Why did the British colonies, why were they successful? Well, the reason the initial explorers came was they were like Columbus, they were looking for spices, they were looking for gold, they were looking for silver, they were looking for China. But finding these North American landmass was sort of an irritation. And yet that's the place. No gold, no silver becomes the largest economy in the world, and still is the largest economy in the world. How on earth did that happen when they didn't find the gold and silver that they were looking for? That's what they thought created value. Instead, and so, like I say, instead they found mosquitoes, trees, all kinds of things that they weren't necessarily interested in. Why did the colonists fight when they were safe, prosperous, and free? Scott's going to talk about that. How did the U.S. Constitution provide a roadmap to economic prosperity? Tawni's going to talk about that. Why did the South fight the war? You've got in your textbook a chart, right? And it's got the advantages of the North and the advantages of the South. And clearly, kids in the Midwest would look at that and say, what? The North had everything. They had more factories, they had more railroads, they had more people, they had just about more of everything. Why on earth would the South think they had a prayer going up against the North? And so, what was that? Why would you fight a war you know you're going to lose? Well, of course, if you're looking at it from their point of view, they didn't think they were going to lose. What were the choices and incentives to them, to the people in the South at the time? And what were the choices and incentives to the people in the North at the time? Was the homestead land really free? I'm going to talk about that. I hope you'll come over and join me, although you've got several great sessions to go to in the breakout. Why did financial panics lead to the establishment of independent central bank? Bill's going to talk to us about that. We have about 3 chapters in the book that are basically finance chapters, and Bill wrote all of them. And we found teachers kind of talk to us over the years about, having trouble with the cross of gold speech and that sort of thing. So, so Bill's going to be our finance guy talking about that. So here in chapter 1, you get introduced to the economic way of thinking. And here the rules are, we're only going to do 6. Our good friend Jim Gortney has a book that I think has 11 or 12. Tawni's co-author on that book, Common Sense Economics, great resource for you. But we have it down to 6. And we're doing high school and middle school. And that's one of the reasons. People choose. People's choices involve costs. People respond to incentives in predictable ways. People create economic systems. These are the institutions that we're talking about. They create an economic system, or I sometimes like to call it rules of the game. I got that from an economist named Paul Hain. Rules of the game that influence choices and incentives to individuals. All right, so those rules of the game, that's the Constitution and other institutions. That's the Federal Reserve System, that the decisions they make influence our choices. People gain when they trade voluntarily. I know it's news to some people that in the last few years have been talking about being skeptical of free trade. Economists believe in free trade, and we also remember that trade deals aren't necessarily free trade. There's a lot of carve-outs. So so what the economists like is that we all agree that people gain when they trade voluntarily. All those words are important. And people's choices involve primary effects, the obvious stuff, but also secondary effects. We are loaded with primary and secondary effects in the shutdown during COVID, just loaded with it, right? The primary effect is slow the spread, the secondary effects being locked down, people not seeing their doctors, all that stuff that makes it very, very difficult. Okay, so let's do the first one first. People choose. Yeah, I know. It seems like kind of a lame idea, but we take it really seriously now. That in economics, we know that resources are limited. I just listened to the radio the other day, and someone was trying to convince the audience resources are not limited. I'm thinking, holy cow, do we have a fight on our hands to bring the economic way of thinking into schools? No, resources are in fact limited, and that's the reason that we have to make choices regarding the things that we want. So we have to make choices, but we often deny that we're making choices, right? So how many times, so let's go to the chat, okay? How many times in the past week have you heard someone say, I'll come back to this in a minute, no choice. So we'll come back to that. So I was hoping to be in Wisconsin. The last time I was in Wisconsin for this program, Scott and Stephanie, Scott and his wonderful wife Stephanie invited me out to a fish fry, and I said, "Oh, I'd really like to join you guys, but I can't make it." And that's not truthful. What I should be saying is, Scott and Stephanie, thank you for asking me, but I have a better alternative. I'm going to choose something over that. Now, you don't want to walk around saying that to your friends because it feels impolite. But Scott's an economist, so he understands this. So economics assumes that people are trying to make the best choice they can, given the information that they currently possess. Now, can you give me an example of one time you heard someone say, "I have no choice"? I'm going to depend on Scott to.
You already had some, Mark. Some people mentioned students every day. Somebody mentioned the state when they had to move to virtual learning. No choice, right? Had to go to virtual learning.
Well, and of course, we had choices. We didn't have to go to virtual learning, but the costs seemed pretty high. And so they did. And of course, students, is there an example in there of a particular student saying, "I have no choice about"?
Not yet. If people want to add anything in the chat, I'll watch it.
Okay. All right. Very good. Yeah. So we assume people have choices. So now see how important that is. You're trying to understand the world from the point of view of the people at the time. So much that's going on today is making judgments about people in the past. And there's nothing wrong with making judgments about people in the past. But our first obligation is to understand the world the way they saw it. They were human beings just like you. And they didn't know how things were going to turn out. So they made choices with limited information. So how would we understand the Southerners fighting the Civil War? How would we understand the colonists fighting the British? We'd have to look at it from their perspective. And so they're making a choice, but that choice surely involves cost. And so, what would you be doing here? So the big cost we talk about in economics is your opportunity cost. So today is Saturday. What would I be doing? I think I was unable to get some exercise in yesterday. So I would probably we have a nice little gym in our little development here, and I'd probably be up there, have walked this morning and then be at the gym for a little bit. And my sacrifice then to be with you is time not spent exercising. What would you be doing? So Scott, if you can look, I'll go to the top and see if I can find. Oh boy, okay, a lot of chat going on. Scott, anybody talking about their opportunity cost?
It's raining, so probably reading, mowing the lawn, spending time with kids, painting an apartment that a tenant wrecked, painting, hiking, wedding planning, working outside, time with my family, kids, time with family, going with family to a cemetery with wife's family, grading papers.
See, some of those I really get. I regard grading papers as a pretty low opportunity cost, and I'd rather be here than painting an apartment. But time with family and things like that, yeah, that's kind of a high opportunity cost. So, and in the image here, this is the original free lunch. We think bars would put out a lunch to have at noontime, and so they'd put out some cold cuts and sandwiches and things, with the idea, of course, of selling some alcohol at lunch. So we think this might have been the thought behind the original free lunch. So tell us what is one thing that people often say is free, but really isn't free? So we're back to the chat.
Public school, time. Welfare, healthcare, public school.
Yeah. And people say public education is free, and of course we're all in the business and we understand the only little thing that's free about public education is you don't pay tuition. It's extremely costly enterprise. I believe in New York City that they spend $20,000 per child in New York City. I know it's a lot less than that in Wisconsin, probably about 11,000. But no, it's not free. And why do some people say that? Well, I don't know. That's an interesting, why do people want to insist that some things are free? Well, one of the things that we try to do in economics is overcome that idea that things are free. And we call it Tinstoffel. That is, there is no such thing as a free lunch. And you see the original free lunch there. I think this may be a Milton Friedman quote. For sure, he used it. There is no such thing as a free lunch. But when we take it seriously and we are grown-ups and look at real life, we know that there's no such thing as a free lunch, that every choice involves cost. And people respond to incentives in predictable ways. Now, this is one of the real meaningful things in economics, that people respond to incentives. Incentives are anything you find rewarding. And while the principle seems really easy, people respond to incentives in predictable ways. I don't know exactly what you find rewarding. So that's where it becomes immediately difficult. Money is certainly a powerful incentive. We're providing books and a little stipend. And so we certainly believe in incentives. Money is such a great incentive because it offers us a means to the end of our choosing. We get to decide how to spend the money. Now, now we're back to the chat. If I were to offer you $10,000 right now, imagine you just got an inheritance of $10,000. Literally, given who you are right at this moment, what do you think you would do with it? Let's see, what would I do with it? Oh, my wife and I like to travel, but it's not a good time to travel. I might just save it for now. Our grandchild's, our oldest grandkid's college is being taken care of right now. That'd be something I'd maybe use it on. Can't travel right now. So I think I would just invest the money for the time being. What are some of the people saying, Scott? What would they do?
All the things you might expect: pay down debt, save it, invest it, travel, remodeling. Somebody said invest in Zoom. A lot of payoff debts, new car, golf clubs. Yeah, lots
Very good. Well, and you see the images here. Normally we'd have people talking about a vacation, and I don't think that really came up. But paying down debt, that's the credit card there. Saving at the 529 plans, that's meant to symbolize that. So yeah, we'd have a lot of choices. But understand, it's more than money. It has to be more than money. Why do people commit acts of heroism? What's the incentive for that? Who are these people? Why do people volunteer to help others? Many nonprofit organizations depend on all kinds of volunteers. Why do people return lost wallets in a hurry? Why do teachers teach in inner city environments when they could get jobs elsewhere? Why do people fight for their country? Well, Mother Teresa is a saint, right? And in 1979, she won the Nobel Peace Prize. And at that time, the Nobel Peace Prize came with $190,000. Now, she's a saint, right? She's a Catholic nun. She takes a vow of poverty. She never drove fancy cars or lived in fancy homes ever. Did she take the money? Yeah. Well, she did. She took the money. Was she a greedy, rotten capitalist for taking the money? Of course not. She was generous. She used the money to build homes for the destitute in India, especially lepers. Was she self-interested? So this is the key in economics. Nobody wants to hang around with selfish people. Selfishness is not a virtue, right? But Mother Teresa is self-interested because in her set of incentives, generosity to the poor is very important to her. So when she gets $190,000, she feels fulfilled by helping others. And thank goodness we have all kinds of people that do this. So that's why even if the money is important, you don't know how people are going to use the money. So if people taking the money, that really doesn't tell you anything about their character. It just says they want the money and who knows what they want to use it for. Maybe they'll give it away. Maybe they'll invest in their child's education. Maybe they'll look after an elderly person that's not doing very well. All kinds of things that money, and that's the beauty about building wealth over long term, is it allows you to have that freedom to not only live with less stress, but also to look after others. Well, and this, I want to just talk about this for a minute. I'm trying to keep a close eye on the time here. Profits are an incentive to producers. So people in the private sector, we allow them the opportunity to or try to earn profits so that they will voluntarily provide us consumers with the goods and services we want. Did you ever hear of this? Corporations put profits ahead of people. I think there are organizations that actually have the name corporations put profits ahead of people. Well, that's just nonsense. Okay. If you show me a corporation that puts profits ahead of people, I'll show you a very soon to be bankrupt corporation. I was on a call last night with an entrepreneur, spends hours and hours and hours thinking about what his customers want. He tries to get into their head. Think how important that is in the private sector. Think how important that is to adolescents, to be paying attention to how other people, what the other people want, not what I want. What do other people want? And then try to fulfill that. And by the way, I get a reward of a profit if I'm able to please them. Profits are hard to earn. Earning large profits, a business has to please an awful lot of people. Talk to the people at Walmart and Apple about how many customers they have and how they keep them happy. Losses, on the other hand, are like disincentives, right? Losses punish businesses and make them change or quit the things they're doing. And so profits and losses work together to get people to voluntarily produce the goods and services we want. And why am I stressing voluntarily? Because in socialist countries, in communist countries, they don't depend on voluntary cooperation. They depend on coercion. If you visit Cuba, you will find a great deal of coercion. The reason people show up to work is because bad things happen to them if they don't. Okay, so what in a free country, we're looking for ways to have people voluntarily provide goods and services that we want, not to coerce them or threaten to take over their businesses or threaten to throw them in jail. You saw Jack Ma just the other day, had to shut down his whole operation. He was going to issue an IPO, and the communist government in China said, no, you don't, right? Because they fear him, that he's too powerful and the Communist Party is concerned. I got to keep going. What are some incentives which teachers like you or your students might be interested in? Let's take a break here and let's load up the chat for a minute.
This is better grades, I see.
Okay.
Gift cards.
What was that, Scott?
Gift cards, higher pay grades, money or food or computer time, parental approval, rewards.
Very good.
Candy.
Candy. I'm surprised candy is still out there as an incentive. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Let's talk about rules of the game. Okay. And how those influence individual choices. Now look at this screen. On the one hand here, the top image is Amsterdam. And just think about that for a minute. They're very famous for these tall buildings, tall and narrow. Now, if you these very long stairways, and you can't see it on the image here, but there are hooks that extend out here. So you can leverage up couches and pianos and things to get them up into these upper floors, because these stairways are too narrow to get up there. So this is very, very inconvenient. And I'm just going to jump ahead. Well, why were they built that way? And I'm going to take a look at the bottom one here. This is an image in Cairo. And these are unfinished apartment buildings. And you can see here, these are occupied. There's clothing being hung out to dry here on this level, and they're not finished. And this is perpetual. They never finished apartments in Cairo. Why is that? So let's do Amsterdam first. Why do they do it this way? Well, it turns out that there's a rule of the game. Years ago, they had a heavy property tax on the frontage, right? So if you heavily tax the width of your house, what do you predict? Tall and narrow. Down here, why do these apartments not get finished? When do you ultimately pay property tax in Cairo? When you get the roof on and you're done. I predict perpetually not done, right? So how you set up the rules of the game are very important. During the last few years, up until about 2016, we were talking about inversions happening around the United States. Big companies would leave the United States and take their firm, merge it with a smaller firm in another country. Well, why did they do that? Well, because they were evil, rotten capitalists. Or maybe they were responding to the rules of the game. Here was the official corporate tax rate at 39%, right? And so today, you can't really see it over here. We lowered the tax rate. So now you see the US comes in like here, okay? And what happened is all those inversions went away. So this is a Johnson Controls, which is a Wisconsin, Milwaukee area company, moving to Cork, Ireland for the Pete's sake, right? Well, why did they do that? Because they were trying to avoid this. And once we got the tax rate down, you notice I don't see a story ever in the Wall Street Journal. I read it every day. I haven't seen a story for 4 years about inversions. And yet that was a regular story in the news every day. It went away when you changed the incentive structure, the rules of the game in this case. So now this is a little participation here, all right? This is one of Twyla's favorite examples. A new rule for the grading system has been approved. Imagine that the school district's Board of Education decided all high school students are capable of learning American history at a very high level. It has decreed that all American history students get an A for the course beginning today. All right, this is a thought experiment now. We know students' time is scarce. We're changing the rule of the game. How might the all A's policy influence their decision? So we're back to the chat.
They won't study, they won't do anything. Work out their courses, don't do any history work.
They're not going to study. They're not going to work hard. They're going to work hard for other courses. They'll use the time that they were going to study in history. Now they're going to use it for something else. That all sounds great, right? Are these outcomes that were intended by the school board? Probably not. And could we think of rules to encourage students to study harder? And I'm sure that it wouldn't take us long to get some good ones. So what are the conclusions? Be careful with how you make up the rules of the game, and keep an eye out for the fact that how you set up the rules influences choices and incentives. Okay, gains from trade. I'm just going to go real quickly. We normally spend a lot of time on this, but could folks in Wisconsin grow oranges? Yes, they would just be $5 oranges. Could Floridians make cheese? Of course they can. It's a large amount of agricultural land in the central parts of Florida, north of the Glades. There's all kinds of farm country up there. Should they? No, of course not. Wisconsinites should specialize in growing cheese, and they're very good at that, making cheese, and they're very good at that. And when you go to the grocery stores, you go to Publix in Florida here, you're going to find Wisconsin is well represented in the dairy case. And of course, what should the Floridians do? Well, we have places called Orange County here, and guess what they do there? They grow oranges, and so they should specialize in oranges and then ship that off to Wisconsin. It's a great case where both sides are better off. That's voluntary trade creating wealth. And so here are our 6 points, and I'm going to stress the last one now. Choices have primary and secondary effects. Now, I want to open this up to the chat. Now, I want you to know. So all of these principles are going to apply, but we're going to talk about primary and secondary effects. In 1990, the federal government was seeking new revenue sources. They were running deficits, right? So Congress passed a law putting a 10% tax on yachts sold in the United States that cost above $100,000. So a 10% tax on yachts sold in the United States above $100,000. They projected they would get 31 million in tax revenue. Instead, the US government on net lost 7.6 million. Now, how could that be? Let's open it up real quick for chat. These are our principles. How could, not only did we not make the 31 million, we actually lost 7.6 million in overall federal revenue. How could that be?
Yeah, you're getting the answers, Mike. Don't buy yachts, foreign yachts, buy yachts overseas. People stopped buying yachts, bought them elsewhere.
Don't buy a yacht at all.
Less than 100,000.
Buy it for less than 100,000.
Buy a used yacht. Yep.
Buy a used yacht. That's right. And so, do you see what you just did? You predicted that rich people who buy yachts make choices. Those choices involve costs. They're responding to an incentive, a change in the rule of the game. And the primary effect was, oh, we're going to get a little more tax revenue. And they did. Let's see if I can get back here. And they got $16.5 million. But they destroyed 8,000 jobs. The yacht building industry turns out to be a very big deal, especially in Wisconsin and in Massachusetts. And these folks were unemployed. What's the town I want in Wisconsin, Scott, where all these jobs were lost?
You're like in Manitowoc, they built like the furniture parts for the inside of them. Yep.
Yep, Manitowoc lost, and we've had teachers come to our workshops and who had family members that were affected by this. And so when you take the lost tax income revenue, the lost income tax revenue, and the increased unemployment payments, that was 24.2 million loss. So a net loss of 7.6 million. Horrified of what they'd done, they canceled it, right? They repealed the tax. And then they proposed immediately having the Boat Building Investment Act, which did not pass. But now they went and subsidized it. Now, so just look at this. The House and the Senate passed this legislation. The president signed it into effect. And yet, if they'd had one sense of primary and secondary effects, they would have understood immediately what would happen to this policy. Well, let's just do a couple other mysteries. We're not going to have, I'm running a little late. I want to minimize that. Okay. Proven oil reserves stand at 531 billion barrels, and we're consuming 16.5 billion. Okay. How many years will it take us to run out of oil? Well, those of you that are running your calculators probably have figured out it's about 30. But of course, it's a trick because this is a situation in 1970. Oil reserves today are at 1.6 trillion. This most recent number I could find was 1.6 trillion. And we have about we're consuming 35 billion barrels of oil at today. Well, how could that be? All right. And then we'd use our economic principles to try and solve that. Here's another one. Water is a scarce resource, especially in Arizona. Yet growing cotton and citrus crops are an important part of Arizona's economy. Why would farmers, what you're looking at here in this image, this is growing rice. This is the Rocky Mountains in the background. They're growing rice in the desert here. And these are misters where people in Phoenix are air conditioning the out of doors. Why would farmers grow these crops in the desert? And why would people air condition the out of doors? Now, I'm going to not do this one because I'm just running out of time. In fact, I am going to just kind of rush through this. The answer here, of course, how could we have more oil reserves is because profits are an incentive to oil producers to produce more. And so in the effort to find profits, oil companies seek, while our supply of oil is finite, we really don't know how much there is. And so they spend lots of research going out to find more. And then they also use technology like the horizontal drilling and so forth, and the fracking to actually find more. And that's why the United States today is one of the largest, I think the largest oil producer in the world. Venezuela has an awful lot of oil, and they're becoming almost zero export of oil these days. I think it's declined like 95% in Venezuela. They have all this oil, but their rules of the game must be very different than our rules of the game. Maybe they're not permitting those companies to earn profits anymore, and whereas our companies do. Why are they? Why are people using so much water in the desert? Largely because they have discounted water prices. Federal policy allows for a water subsidy to these farmers. That price of water is very low, so they go out there and farm the desert. It really hurts the Colorado River, creates all kinds of primary and secondary effects, a lot of secondary effects that are negative. But it's a rule of the game problem. Bananas are a tropical fruit, but you're sure not going to find many of them being grown in Wisconsin or other parts of the Midwest. I looked at Wisconsin statutes. They're not there anyplace. There's no rules about how those bananas get into the Sendik's and the other grocery stores in Wisconsin. Why is that? I'm going to try this video. We'll see if this works.
You don't have any volume, Mark? I think there's when you share it, you have to share with volume, which is.
Okay.
So I think the only way to show that is to stop sharing and then reshare. But in the bottom, when you reshare, there's a little thing you click on the bottom that says share computer audio.
All right. We're just going to move on. The story of the video is, how do all these people voluntarily cooperate to bring John Stossel a steak in New York City? All the farmers, all the people who involved in the butcher shops and all the production to try and get a steak across the country from Iowa all the way to New York City. I use this slide to make the same point. Here's Boris Yeltsin is amazed when he visits a grocery store in Houston. Now here's a guy that's one of the most powerful people in the world, and he's looking at a dairy case that you and I just take for granted every day. I mean, my wife and I, we kind of, we have to go to the store today. Yeah. Well, we should go to, down here in Florida, we go to Publix, and we should just say, oh my God, what a wonderful world this is. Look at all the choices we have. And how did all this stuff arrive? Can you imagine what the federal plan would look like if we had to have a plan for all this? And this is exactly what the old Soviet Union tried to do. The bureaucrats in Moscow would tell you when to plant, when to harvest, how to make your cheese. Can you imagine why the Soviet Union finally collapsed? It was, how could people sitting in Moscow command a whole country to produce a simple thing like cheese, right? And we just take this for granted. So when we talk about markets and the economic way of thinking, we often are talking about competition in markets. And competition is a great thing to talk about. But we often lose the idea of the cooperation that goes on. The voluntary cooperation, people just trying to earn a living, just trying to take care of their families. But in order to do that, they have to serve others. They have to go to work every day. They have to produce goods and services that we desire. And so a market economy provides a system of encouraging voluntary cooperation where you're going to try to help people that maybe if you knew them, you wouldn't even like them, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to love them. You just try to provide them the goods and services that they want. And we kind of take it for granted, and almost certainly your students take all the technology and the opportunities they have for online purchases and so forth for granted. And it's our job sometimes, I think, in economics to stress that that's not the case. And in fact, we have a name for this, and it's called the invisible hand. Adam Smith wrote about that the invisible hand contributes to providing all of us access to goods and services requiring the cooperation of others. Smith wrote about this a lot, about people, this invisible hand sort of guiding us. We are the profit motive and supply and demand sort of grooves us in a direction to be productive to others. And that results in good things. Allowing people to act in their own self-interest often promotes positive outcomes. John Stossel gets his steak. Mr. Yeltsin gets to look at this lovely dairy case. I get my steak. We're probably going to grill a steak tonight. And so all kinds of positive things. And, the markets aren't perfect. Of course, it requires some regulation and whatnot, especially in like the financial sector that's very, very complicated. But allowing people this freedom to act is the vast majority of our standard of living these days. So really just a quick teaching idea. So if you take these 6 principles, where would it take you? Well, how are choices being made? So whatever situation you're looking at in history or geography, how are choices being made? Individuals making choices, leaders making choices, followers making choices. We're always looking for why, what choices are they making, and look at the costs involved. Now, there's probably dollars involved. Money is a very important incentive, but there's also, like we said earlier, there's always the opportunity cost. So all the choices involve costs. So we would look at that. What are the incentives? Well, it's probably money, but it might not be obvious, like the Mother Teresa situation. So, why would people fight and die for their country? So it's clearly money's important. People in the armed forces get paid, but it's got to be more than that, right? What are the rules of the game? What are the formal rules? And we saw in our yacht example, the formal rules can make a big difference. So this is why we want to have a somewhat limited role of government, because when you're setting up these rules, you could have all kinds of weird things happen. There are informal rules in how we operate too. And how might those rules be influencing behavior? What about trade? Is voluntary cooperation going on? Note that you guys are on this call now for the last hour and 15 minutes. I'm going to wrap up here in just a very short period here, a couple minutes. And you're doing it voluntarily. And Scott and I and Tawni and Bill are all here voluntarily, right? So this has got to be win-win for all of us. At least that's what we thought coming into it. I hope you still feel that way. Or is it involving coercion, right? Or is it coercion? So is there voluntary cooperation going on, or are people being coerced into behavior? And then the primary and secondary effects that we've talked about a lot about. Tell you what, you're going to be seeing more of me. I'll be running the Homestead Act one. If you've got questions, please, why don't you hold on to them, and I'll try to get to them when I come back. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, and I'm still sharing, I guess. All right.
In the top, Mark.
Yeah, I'm up in the top.
If you hover over the top.
Yep. And you are screen sharing. Stop share. I see it now. There we go. So we'll be available for some questions a little bit later, but we really are right at just slightly after 10 o'clock. I hope you enjoyed that. Great contributions all, says, okay, from William. Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate it. And let's take a nice half-hour break. And when you come back, I think Matt's going to be taking us to our breakout room. So whatever breakout room you chose earlier, that's where you're headed next. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Hey guys. And I think if you didn't make a choice, or we don't know what that choice is, Matt can work with you one-on-one. You'll be kind of left in the main room, and then he can ask you where you want to go and put you there. So when we come back together in about a half an hour, we'll have 4 different breakout rooms running.
Thank you, Twyla. This is all very interesting. And we got several people in the chat. Nearpod works with Schoolology. Nearpod. Okay, Pear Deck can be integrated with Canvas. Okay. Take a class with Debbie Henning. Yeah, always a good idea with FTE. Debbie's one of the really good teachers out there. So, okay, now should I share my screen, Matt?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So there we go. Now, here we go. And come on, buddy. There we go. All right. So we're going to do a little overview of the book, the Economic Episodes of American History book. And apparently you're getting the red, white, and blue book. Apparently we've run out of the Jamestown. It's a long story, but the second edition has done kind of well. And we did a redesign on the book to make it a little bolder, although I still like my Jamestown scene quite a lot. So that's the book. I think you're going to get the red cover. So it's a Economic Episodes in American History. There's little information about it. Who are the users? Well, it tends to be high school and middle school teachers of American history. I know you're shocked that that's the case, but we also have, and we've got a few econ teachers on the call here. The next most popular group is high school economics teachers. And then we have a few college teachers that social studies methods people. Some people adopt it for showing the integration, how to do an integration between economics and history. And we've got a couple of people that teach interdisciplinary courses, and they use it too. You may have had the first edition. In the second edition, we expanded the author team, and Bill and I enjoyed writing the book the first round, but we are really very fortunate to have Scott Niederjohn and Tawni Ferrarini come join up with us. It made the process easier for the revision. We updated contemporary figures. We kept a lot of the historical stuff the same, but we updated in all the contemporary stuff. We had to rewrite almost all the then and nows. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And we had to redo all the web resources. And the historical content, we just reread and did a little refreshing, but we didn't do a heavy change. So if you have the first book, it's the then and nows that are the most dramatic change. So this is how the book is organized. First, we always start with a story. We frame the issue with a personal story. Now, here's a story from one of Bill Wood's chapters. This is Rose Will Monroe, and she became the basis for Rosie the Riveter. And so Rose joins the labor force. So this is about after World War II, women coming into the labor force in very large numbers. And we use her as our example for that. So there's always a story to start with. Some of them are famous people, some are less famous people. I'd say most are less famous people. We have a little box for key economic concepts. And I always say this is overkill, I know. And that first chapter that I kind of gave you an overview in the first session today, obviously there are too many concepts in a normal sequence, in a normal way to teach. But we just want to get a lot of those basics out there in that first chapter. So that first chapter, it wouldn't hurt to have students read it more than once. The historical context. So then we have a section there on the historical context. And this really plays into what Tawni was talking about. So here you see the economic conditions after the Articles of Confederation, the debt, possible trade wars, military weakness, and so forth. So this content should, if it's not exactly familiar to the students, it's real similar to what they have in their book. And that's the idea, is that this would sort of be a bridge. And you can already see what's going to happen next is we're going to move to Adam Smith and the economics of the US Constitution. And that's the economics of section. So if you look back at that chapter, you see there's the bridge. And then we begin the actual economics part. And here's another example of that. So this is economics of scale. And this is one of the charts in the book I really love, how the Model T is selling for $900 in 1910. And Ford is making 20,000 of them. Look at here, 1922, 1.3 million, almost 1.4 million. And the price has gone down to $333. So there's some economies of scale. And so we just, we do an actual economics, firms have two sorts of costs, variable costs and fixed costs. So this is where the economic stuff is. And then we didn't want to just go on and on. So we decided to break things up a little bit with questions and answers, historical questions and economic answers. And so that's what you see here. Now, this is on the Great Depression. And another one of Bill's chapters I seem to be favoring. Did the stock market crash cause the Great Depression? The answer is no. The stock market crash didn't help. Did U.S. trade policy make the Depression worse? Yes, the Smith-Hawley tariff certainly did. Why were banks vulnerable to failure? Now we talk about bank failures and the failure of the Federal Reserve to act as a lender of last resort. So there, we get to write the questions, of course, so that gives us some control. But, we're just trying to break it up a little bit. And so many teachers today, as well as students, would still believe the stock market crash was the main cause of the Great Depression. There's always a primary source, and this is turning out to be one of our better ideas. The teachers really tell us they like the primary source. And here is an indenture of Richard Lothar. And so this is in the chapter on indentured servitude. And it's showing that, well, an indentured servant signed a contract. Someone that was enslaved never signed a contract. If you're enslaved, you're taken by force, brutal force, and forced to work. Quite a difference between, not that the life of an indentured servant was an easy life, but it did involve the signing of a contract that then expired at some point. The contract was fulfilled and you were free to do what you wanted to do. Somebody want to say something there? Okay. And then another popular feature is the then and now. And Scott wrote this one: will student loans be the next bubble to pop? And so there's still big issues out there with student loans. And so this is a current update in the Roaring Twenties chapter, where there's mention of the stock market crash. And so this is a more contemporary version of a possible bubble. Then we have discussion questions. So all the major sections have discussion questions. So I'm back to the Constitution chapter. How did the ideas of Adam Smith influence the writing of the US Constitution? Then those answers appear in the teacher's edition. And I have not, Julie, I'm going to send you the teacher edition as soon as we're done here. And then I'm going to ask if you would share that with the teachers. So you'll get that and you'll see the answers there. Then there are web resources at the end of the chapter and those have all been freshened up. So all these links should work. And then there's a glossary that's a little more than I ever thought it would be, but there it is, a big glossary, and there's an index. Now the teacher edition, it has chapter objectives. It has a chapter summary. It's in a PDF. It's only in PDF. So you can have it on your computer and you just take it home. You can look at it anytime. There's an activity for every chapter. So there's a lesson plan. It essentially becomes like a lesson plan. Correlations to national history standards and economic standards. Correlation to Common Core, less important today than it was when we wrote this. Classroom economic thinking poster is again at the Wool site. So if you go to the Wool publishing, there it says economics test. So there's a test of economic thinking, and then here's the poster. And so you can order that. And then there are some other resources in here too, as well. And here's the test of economic thinking. So let's see, how are we doing here? All right, I'm going to kind of breeze through the table of contents, okay? So we did chapter 1. We didn't talk about chapter 2. Why did the British colonies succeed economically? And it's an institutional answer. The British provided the essentials for a market economy, including private ownership of property. Some of them just kind of found their way magically into this, but that we mainly favored the British institutions of favoring trade, private ownership, having the right sorts of institutions to encourage a market economy. I have hinted at John Harrower here. Why did he sell himself into bondage? It was a tough life for folks back then, and he did sell himself into bondage by signing an indentured servant contract. And so you'll learn, but what's critical about this chapter is this particular market, the indentured servant market, develops, and Britain winds up bringing thousands of settlers here. they outperformed France and Spain dramatically. So the reason that I'm doing this workshop in English is probably because of indentured servitude, if you can believe that. See, the French and the British, the French, came to do fur trading. The Spanish was the conquistadors and a military operation. The British come later, and they really settled, and the bondage, the chapter 3 helps explain that. Why do you fight when you're safe, prosperous, and free? Scott talked about that. This is a transportation chapter that's very important: turnpikes, canals, and railroads. What did we do before the interstates? And sort of the economics of transportation at the time. This is slavery, a market institution. Earlier in the chat, somebody commented on the wealth that was generated by slavery, and certainly the Southern economy benefited. That is, some people in the Southern economy benefited from slavery. The owners of plantations and so forth were much better off, but it was always a win-lose operation, right? It's like the Russian gulags. Nobody looks at the Russian gulags and say, oh, wealth was generated. I mean, certainly some people did better as a result, but the Russian gulag was no market. No one confused that. No one would say that was a market. Well, neither was American slavery. American slavery was much worse than a gulag because you had racial aspects to it as well. But so you might want to read this. The slavery is the absolute rejection of a market economy. It's because it requires a market economy requires voluntary exchange, and there was nothing voluntary about slavery. Okay, so that's so when people equate market economies with slavery, they misunderstand what a market economy or capitalism really is. So you might just take a look at that chapter. The Civil War, why did they fight when the Norse economy was so much stronger? So we sort of look at the incentives on both sides on how to deal with slavery. How did the Civil War change the US economy? I believe Tawni wrote this chapter. And so there's a lot of research that talks about, oh, well, the Southerners were no longer in Congress, and this paved the way to industrialization. Maybe not. So she's going to take a look at, so you want to read chapter 9. Homestead Act, I talked about that. Was free land really free? No, it came with a lot of costs. People don't, with the American Indians, did they favor communal ownership? In some ways, yes. They certainly didn't look at property ownership the way Europeans looked at. On the other hand, the Comanche had pretty strong property rights. Everybody knew who owned the pony that a good buffalo hunter rode. Everybody knew who owned that pony. He might not have had a deed. He might not have had a title. He didn't even have a brand on him. But everybody knows that it was the hunter that owned that horse, and that horse was really important to the whole community. So that meant those property rights were really protected and enforced, because that hunter was really good at getting meat, not only for his own family but for other people as well. Why did the railroads cause the economy of the late 1800s to grow? So the textbooks sort of imply that. We take a little different look at it. Hard currency. This is one of Bill's chapters. A lot of teachers comment on this, the Sound Money and Cross of Gold speech by William Jennings Bryan, but really to get at what are they talking about? Why were the farmers wanting inflation during this time? So there's a nice explanation there. Were the robber barons really robbers or barons? So, and then we end there. The then and now has to do with the current big tech companies. So I think you'll have some fun with that. Why did the 19th century monopolies disappear? It turns out that Teddy Roosevelt I think we only broke up like 4 trusts. One of them never even got started. The most famous one was Standard Oil. Well, where did all those other trusts go, right? And the answer is going to be competition. Is what, even in the oil industry, competition was emerging when Standard Oil was, just as Standard Oil was being broken up by the Supreme Court ruling, the oil competitors were coming down on top of him. It was just going to be a matter of time before he lost the monopoly that he was running. That is, okay. Why did financial panics lead to the establishment of the central bank? Bill talked about that earlier, and we talked about how important the Fed has become. Who was the Titanic baby? This is an immigration chapter. The Titanic baby is a baby that survived the sinking and becomes a very successful entrepreneur. So this is the chapter on immigration. What made the Roaring Twenties roar? So this is economic growth during that time. Why did a mild recession in 1929 become the Great Depression? The main takeaway there, it's going to be Federal Reserve policy. not the crash. We talk about the New Deal, and we talk about kind of, the New Deal came with costs and benefits, and we talk about some of the problems with the New Deal as well as some of the benefits. We talk about the changing rules under the Roosevelt administration regarding unions. There's Rosie the Riveter. Here's the economy after World War II. How interesting is that? In 1945, so many people thought after 10 years of depression that we're going to go right back in, as soon as these government contracts go away, that we're going to fall right back into a great recession, a great depression again. And of course, the reverse happened. It turned out with some smart policies and other things, the American economy emerged to dominate the world, really. Why? It says why. How many times have I read this? It should be who desegregated Major League Baseball, Adam Smith or Jackie Robinson. Of course, Adam Smith was not around in 1947. So we use Adam Smith as sort of our icon to mean market forces like competition and supply and demand. How could those market forces have influenced Jackie Robinson and get him to sign with the Brooklyn Dodgers? And so it's a fun story, I think. And it also shows how things were changing well before the Civil Rights Movement. How did the Marshall Plan become a model for foreign aid programs? Take a good look at this one today. What were the origins of the African-American middle class? There was an African-American middle class way before the Civil Rights Movement. How did that happen? What did African-Americans do after slavery? How did they wind up? There's still a big gap in net worth between African-Americans today and whites, but progress has been made. What happened there? Where did the African-American middle class come from? Why did communism collapse? So we talk a little bit about the Soviet Union. This is the stagnant 70s, the stagflation episode where Paul Volcker winds up raising interest rates into the sky. This is the tech chapter. Is the information revolution as big as the industrial revolution? Is free trade out of date? And finally, the growth of the federal government. Now, we don't have a pandemic chapter, but we do have a new now and then that we're going to be putting in on the Spanish flu, relating that to the current situation we're in. So here is the economic thinking chapter, and this is the poster. And there you can see the poster, and so you can get this as a PDF at Roll Publishing, and the idea is that you would be able to maybe display this in your classroom or just turn it into a slide or something. And then you could, if you're going to do some economics, use the economic way of thinking, you'd have these principles available. And then there's also a test. So here is, if you would like to do some research with your students, this is a test of economic thinking. You'll see it's kind of a different test. You get a situation. Fred and Wilma are a young married couple, and they are going to take a vacation. And so they have to get the multiple choice answer right, but then they have to link it to one of the economic principles. People make choices, people's choices involve costs. So it's a little more than your regular test. I think it's kind of interesting. And Scott and a guy named Colin O'Reilly have done a little research on this and found that it turned out to be pretty effective, and showing that you can integrate the economic way of thinking into US history courses. And how do you like that? We're slightly early. I'm going to maybe I'm going to stop my share so I can look a little bit more, unless somebody wants me to go back. Does anybody need me to go back? Okay, so I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to check the chat. Someone says they're looking forward to the textbook. Chapter 15 was the essay question on my final. So Mark Matthews is saying chapter 15 was the essay question on his final exam. Very good. When you were in Indiana as an undergrad. Okay. Econ students love chapter 15 and 16. I don't have these memorized totally, you guys. Oh, the robber barons. Okay, very good. Okay, and here's someone saying, is it Mackenzie? Looking forward to using it in civics, economics, US history, and AP US history. Very good. All right. Can you teach the chapters independently of each other? Yes. The way we put this together is that we really would like you to use chapter 1, because we really come back to those principles, not in every chapter, but most chapters go back to those economic principles that get introduced in chapter 1. So the other chapters will work better if you use chapter 1. But after that, yeah, there's no referring back and forth to the content back and forth. So they do stand by themselves. Oh, you're using the original blue edition. Yes, that's great. Like I say, the then and nows are the main thing that's going to have changed there. Okay. Any other questions you want to put up in the chat? Okay. Does anybody know if Chris Albert has joined us?
You just joined.
Okay. All right. I think then we're just going to go ahead. So let me just make sure, let me just keep checking the chat here. Trying to get more economics into my American government and civics course, the reason I'm here today. Very good. You're glad to hear that, Ron. Are you planning on writing a chapter on COVID versus Spanish flu? Right now, it's a then and now. But yeah, we haven't thought much about the 3rd edition. We've been very busy with the 2nd edition, but yeah, I think you'd almost certainly, I can almost think of points you'd make, like comparing the government shutdown due to health issues to other recessions. That this was a totally different bird, and so it allows us to talk about that. We talk about you just compare it to the financial crisis, for example, 2008. I'm not sure what we would do yet, but yeah, I think we almost certainly have to. And maybe I can get the authors. Maybe we could put a chapter up on Rich Wool's page to talk about COVID. We do have a then and now that's been up there.
And I'll go ahead and Mark, I'll put that then and now in our Dropbox so they can get it if they want, the one in the Spanish flu versus COVID.
Well, excellent. Yeah, Scott, I think you were the main writer on that, and or did we write that together? I don't remember, but I think that you certainly had a heavy hand in that. So yeah, we'll send that to you too. That's the current then and now, and it ties back to the Spanish flu. Okay. I wandered into Dr. Schug's NCSS session in Chicago by accident. Thank you. Hi, Jennifer. Best wrong turn ever. Well, you're very kind to say that. Yeah, we've been at it for a while, Jennifer. It's true. And I'm just updating my website. So I've made a decision that I'm going to stay at it just a little bit longer until you guys tell me to finally leave the room. All right, now we're going to move to our next section now. And Chris, I'm told you're on the call. I haven't picked you up yet, but let me see. But let me just, I hear him. Okay, so Chris, why don't you open up your mic? And I want you all to meet Chris Albert. And Christopher Albert teaches at Cedarburg High School in Cedarburg, Wisconsin. Good old Cedarburg, Wisconsin. In Cedarburg, everything has a doily on it. And but Chris is a very smart American history teacher. And Chris, you go ahead and, and this is just open game. You guys go ahead in the chat. I know the authors are here, but, strengths and weaknesses of the book. We hope to do a 3rd edition. We're just real curious to hear how you use the book and any thoughts you have. So go ahead, Chris.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Hello, I'm Chris Albert. I teach at Cedarburg High School. I teach AP US History, so I currently don't teach regular US History, but I still use economic episodes with AP US. I currently use probably 2/3 of the chapters to 4 different reasons. My 4 focuses for using this book, and I thought maybe this is why Mark and Scott, which again, thank you for inviting me. You want to hear about how I actually implement the book or how I use the book. And I do have 4 focuses when I use this book. One is to introduce different lenses or points of view to history. I find that a lot of my students come into my class, they think history is just dates and memorizing names and and all that. And I get to bring historiography to them. I get to bring the idea that history changes over time. History is always constantly changing, and different lenses are being introduced to discover the truth. A second thing I look at is to practice that skill of looking at different points of view. A third one is I like the book for it brings up many of the chapters are honing in on significant changes in American history. These significant changes where there is a then and now. And I think it sounds like you've already been talking and looking at the book in a couple different chapters this morning. This cause and effect thinking skill, the compare and contrast thinking skill that students need to practice when they do history. So I do like those chapters that bring that out. And the fourth reason I like this book and use it is to reinforce the abstract concepts or content that we have to cover in US history that students normally don't grapple well with. So I can go through a couple of those, all four of those things. I can pull out some chapters for you. I know Mark only gave me, 2 minutes to do this?
No, you've got a little more time, Chris.
No, I think you said you gave me like 10 minutes. So, but what I like about this book also is the setup. It's set up in what I think are 4 sections, each chapter. You have the historical context, which gives students a nice little background. There's a story to it. It engages the students that way. Then there's the historical thinking questions, which that's for AP US History I really delve into. I want them to read those questions and read those answers, and then we can talk about them in class. And then the primary sources are, very simple for them to use and to engage in. And then the then and nows, the students really like the then and nows. It really brings the history to the present. It also is another historical thinking skill of continuity and change over time that we have to cover. So the then and now, I think, to me, that was one of the most engaging parts when I first came to you guys and came to one of your seminars. I was like, wow, this is what students need. They need to see how they can connect to their life today. So I really like those. So if you're interested in the chapters that I like, to introduce different lenses and historiography, I use the beginning portion of the book. Chapter 1, of course, is just the introduction to thinking economically. But then chapters 3, 4, 5, and 7 are all they're kind of the first third of my curriculum with AP US History. That's dealing with indentured servitude, the Revolutionary War, the Constitution, and the issue of slavery. And so those chapters really bring out this idea of there's another lens to look at history, and it's economics. Students come to me, they've taken US history or parts of US history over the years, but they get a lot of social reasons, they get a lot of political reasons. And when they come to me and I bring out this book for them and they're like, wow, it opens their eyes a lot for this. There's another way to look at this history. And for many of them, it makes sense. They get the social and the political side, but when they see the economic side, it makes sense to them. So kind of neat to look at that economic freedom, the Fifth Amendment and the other Bill of Rights for that. For the Revolutionary War one, the primary source you have in there, the map, that's a great one. For that, some students, that visual aid for the map for the Quebec Act for a reason for the colonists to revolt or the rebel. That one it helps us. The students I've had, they've really hooked onto that map, and they now actually see it, that land was up for grabs and now it was taken away. So for practicing the historical point of view, there's one chapter that sticks out for me. It's been a AP US History essay question. If you're familiar with AP US, the LEQ or the DBQ in the past, it's the robber barons, chapter 15. Are the industrialists, are they captains of industry, or are they robber barons? That one just brings it home well. So I definitely use that one because I do know it's a good chance that they're going to get a question on the exam for that. So the significant changes throughout time. Again, I said this is one of the reasons, the cause and effect, the compare and contrast. There's a before and after. The chapter 9 on the Civil War is a good one. You have the primary sources with Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. You're talking about sharecropping. The then and now is the auto alley. Now, I also teach AP Human Geography to freshmen, at Cedarburg. And we spent a fair amount of time on Auto Alley in one of the chapters there. So a lot of my students that took AP Human Geography with me are now taking AP US History. And so that then and now for Auto Alley in that chapter 9, really, it's a good connection for them. It's 2 years later, but they still get it. And so it's good to get that cycling or that spiraling going for their learning. The progressives, chapter 16 and 17 are great for the before and after, learning about the Fed. Chapter 22 about union membership, the rise of union membership with the New Deal, and then the Taft-Hartley Act at the end of the war or right after the war. This significant change in views about unions. Then 23 is the changes in the roles of women. So delving into maybe minorities, giving women a voice in history. I love that you have The Real Rosita River there by Norman Rockwell. I love that one. I love to pull that one out and actually look at that one. I've actually been looking for a supersized poster of that, maybe one of those fat tires or whatever they call them, where it's a big thing that you put up on the wall of the real Rosita Riveter, because there's so much more to look in that one than there is in the commonly commercialized Rosita Riveter. I think you even point out there that nobody ever notices the Mein Kampf at her foot. And so when I bring that up to students, they're like, oh, that's amazing, so I love that one. For African Americans, again, you also bring up minorities, giving them a voice with 25 and 27. That's Jackie Robinson, and then The Great Migration, which has, again, connecting back to my AP Human Geography course, where we talk about migration a lot, and racism or ethnic diversity, or the issues that come with that great migration and urbanization. So it's a great jumping off point for me to bring that stuff back again for them. The last one I talked about was just bringing up these abstract ideas, and that's a lot of economics that come through US history, that these chapters help them understand that economics is a powerful movement in our history. Chapter 12 is actually about Native Americans. And actually I find that students, that's an abstract idea about treaties. How could they give up these treaties? How could they give up their land? How could they give up their rights? And then this concept of, can you own a buffalo? The students actually interested in that. And then the then and now, again, you have the conservationism with the whales. So there's always a student, at least one student of mine that loves whales. And so that part they get into and looking at conservation today. Chapter 14 is the silver and gold, inflation versus deflation. Wow, that one helps a lot. Those students they don't understand, you could have bimetallic currencies, and you start talking about that and they read that chapter, that helps a lot with that abstract idea. Chapters 20 and 21 are the Depression and New Deal. And again, that then and now, Mark, for 2008, right? That one is a great one for them to get it into their lives. They might even remember now, we're getting a little further on, but their families have been impacted by the 2008 still. So a good one there. And then again, I'm showing my age here, chapter 28 about communism, growing up in the Cold War, growing up in the 80s, this whole Cold War communism idea is very easy for me to understand, but for students today, it's ancient history already. And so that chapter on communism helps a lot. And of course, stagflation. Explaining stagflation is a troublesome idea, and the causes, and now it actually makes sense to a lot of students there. Chapter 29, and a great primary source with Jimmy Carter's Malaise speech. Understanding that. My last one I want to talk to you about is chapter 32. That last one, the 3 presidents, primary source. I actually use that as a mini DBQ. So just that one alone, standing alone, if you want to talk about the last 60 years of American history, just given those 3 primary sources, I think it's Jefferson, FDR, and LBJ, and actually talk about government policy over the last 60 years and use that as a mini DBQ, document-based question, is a great chapter to use, just that primary source. So no, I think I've talked enough just talking at you about the chapters I like and how I use it. I use it as a supplementary source, but it really helps me bring home some of this content that I have to get through with APUS. So I appreciate you asking me to come and talk, Mark and Scott. So I'll turn it over to the next person if you want.
Okay, well, I'll introduce Twyla here in just 1 minute. We've had some nice questions. Well, first, Chris, thank you very much. Chris is an unusually heavy user of the book. Most people would not use, there's 32 chapters. Most people wouldn't use 2/3 of the book. We get that. We didn't design it that you'd use all of it. It was meant to be a supplement, and we even slip up and call it a textbook. It's not really, it kind of looks like a textbook though. And that's because the publisher is an old textbook publisher, and everything he publishes is going to look like a textbook. You better believe it. Bill and I did the first edition. We imagined a much more slender version. Somebody's asking how many days to do one chapter. And maybe, I bet Twyla will comment on that herself, but somebody's responding, say about a day. I'll let Twyla go on, but some people say they like the neat structure. Well, you've heard it from Chris, but also that it's not an overwhelming thing. It never was meant to be overwhelming, even though the book looks a little bit bigger. Well, Twyla Prundy has come to our Green Bay when we would do this in Lambeau Field, and she's been there a few times, and we got to know her. And she's now moved to Liberty Middle School. And what's the name of the school district, Twyla?
It's Edwardsville.
Oh, it is Edwardsville. Okay.
Yeah, Edwardsville, Community Unit School District number 7.
All right. So Twyla's coming to us from Illinois. Chris was from Wisconsin. And so Twyla, you've been with us for a while now. Please share experiences, good ones or bad ones. It's okay.
Okay, so a little backstory. I just left a district I had been in for 12 years, very small, rural, like 900 kids in the whole district. I am now in a building that has 900 kids, has 14 schools in the district now. So back when I started using this book, the year before, we had a teacher quit like 3 or 4 days before school started. They didn't replace her, so they put those kids that were assigned to her into my history class. So I actually had 7th and 8th graders combined. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So I have geography and US history standards, and I'm trying to cover everything. So I ended up creating kind of my own curriculum that was world history, world geography together. So we'd start out with like some geography concepts, and we started out in the Horn of Africa, and we kind of followed the human migration pattern, covering both geography and history at the same time. So the following year, which was this past school year, my 8th graders are now in high school. Those 7th graders are now 8th graders. And the 8th graders are like, what are you going to teach us? We've already learned it all. It was good enough for those 8th graders last year to go to high school. We don't need to learn anything. They literally refused to even look at the textbook, listen to me. And I'm like, are you guys kidding me here? So I said, oh, all right, you know what? I can handle this. So I waited over the weekend. When I came back in on Monday, I handed the kids this book, and I called it a textbook. Purposely, I called it a textbook. I said, why don't you look at this textbook? And they're like, couple of kids. And I'm like, first of all, I had 5 sections. So 4 of those sections ended up all just reading Grapes of Wrath. The smallest section I had was 13, and I had 20 textbooks. So I figured I could handle this one class. I'm going to give it a shot. So that group of kids, 13 of them, I think it was 6 boys and 7 girls. So pretty much half and half. But the boys were the kind that were making D's and F's in all their classes, didn't care about school. I had one girl that has a photographic memory, one girl that is going to be president of the United States one day, and I had a couple of special ed kids in there. So I had the gamut of range of ability in there, and it was me by myself, of course, no big deal, 13 kids. So I handed these kids this textbook, and they go, this looks kind of neat. And even the boys that didn't do too well in school, they go, is this the book we're really going to use? And I said, yeah, what do you think? And a couple of the boys, they're like, hey, if these chapters are only 5 to 7 pages long, I think we can handle this. So I allowed it to be the textbook where I just supplemented into it instead of using it as a supplement. So I kind of did the reverse. The kids absolutely loved it. They loved how each chapter was set up the same. And a couple of those boys, they caught on to the chapter 1 terms, those economic terms being used over and over through the chapters. They're like, hey, we just had a test on these same terms. And I go, good, you should know them by now, not the 3rd test. They're like, yeah, we know these. So the kids really got into it. They like the primary source documents. They like the then and now the best. A couple of the kids really like the charts and graphs, but definitely the primary source documents and the then and now sections. When they came in after about the third day of this class, they came in, they said, hey, since we're different, can we do this different? And I said, well, what do you mean? And it was one of the girls, and she says, can we treat this more like a college class or high school? And I said, sure. What do you want to do? They said, well, can we just kind of, and they were throwing ideas out. So the kids ended up running the class. They would come in and say, hey, why don't we just skim through this chapter today? And then tomorrow we'll delve into the questions, and then I had a couple of them, I'd talk to them during lunch, and they would see like the PowerPoints and different things they could do. And they literally got up and led the class, and they just loved it. It opened their mind to a new way of thinking, and they could see a bigger picture. And so even after a weekend, I had a couple of kids come in and say, hey, I watched this movie, and the movie had nothing to do with economics or history or whatever, but they're like, I was trying to think ahead of what was going to happen. And not only that, I was getting the bigger picture. Not just that the movie was about this, it was actually about, this bigger concept. So it opened their minds to a new way of thinking, seeing the bigger picture. And I think they're still doing that now. I'm still in touch with a couple of the kids that were in that particular class, even though I've switched districts. They will text me every once in a while and say, hey, we're studying this, but I know this is the bigger picture. It's not just about this particular concept. And it's really great to hear from those kids. When we went into shelter in place in the middle of March, the governor says, we all had to stay home. I was teaching from home, of course. I was Zooming a lot, never even did a Zoom before. But so I was sitting there, I was Zooming with these kids, and our superintendent had told us that for those first 2 weeks, we could not introduce any new material. We just had to pretty much give them busy work to keep them in the mode of thinking and in school and just working. So I was like, man, this class, what am I going to do? We were almost to the end of a chapter. I didn't want to give them a test over it, knowing that we hadn't finished. So I ended up using the web resources at the end of the chapter, those links, and I would send them out a link. I'd actually go to the websites first, and I would go through it, and I would come up with questions. So I did that for the first 2 weeks. The kids kind of thought that was okay, but they were bored with it after the first 2 weeks. Once we got the okay to introduce new material and stuff, we kind of just zoomed and went through. I never tested them through a Zoom on that chapter until the next chapter. But back to when we were in class and the kids wanted to do something different, they would always, if somebody wouldn't agree with something, then they would actually come up with the fact like, hey, why don't we do a debate? So it was, left side of the room do this, the right side of the room. If you didn't agree, you go over on this side. And they battled back and forth. Didn't matter what the concept was. They were talking, they were thinking, and it was great. This year's a little different. Since I switched districts, what they did over the summer was the teachers, they're in cohorts. It's actually middle school. I was actually at a junior high last year. I was the only social studies teacher at the junior high. Now there's like 9 of us, different cohorts. So it's 6th, 7th, and 8th grade too, where I'm at. I'm primarily 6th grade, but I work with the 7th and 8th grade teachers. And then of course we collaborate during social studies meetings. But what I'm doing now is, the teachers, they met all last summer. They created everything and they've got it on Schoology for resources. So now I go to those teachers in those meetings and I'm like, hey, why don't we use this? And so we're pulling things from the textbook and they're using those links and those primary source documents mainly and putting them out there on Schoology because we're teaching with the hybrid model. We have kids A and B days and some are fully remote. And it's working well. It's not what I want to do, but of course with COVID, I can't change what they're already doing when I wasn't there. I literally got hired about a week before school started. So I wasn't involved in all that planning stuff. One of the chapters the kids really liked was that chapter 3 on indentured servitude. When I first mentioned that just indentured servitude to them, they thought it was a politically correct term for slavery. And once we got into it, they realized it was not exactly the same as slavery with the contract and everything. So when we did the extension activity of the Army, if you join the Army, are you considered an indentured servitude type because you've signed a contract and you're working. And the kids really liked that. But then I got the boys that didn't care about school very much when we brought in the minor league baseball contract. The kids were just like, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. So seeing those kids just come alive in this class, and I know it was mainly because of the textbook. It wasn't me, because the kids were running the show. So that's basically how I used it in the past. I'm hoping to use it again more once we get back to normal, or I have more control over my social studies, what I'm doing. But that's about it.
All right,
Thank you guys
Twyla.
for letting me speak again. I appreciate it.
Well, we might be doing some more of these, you guys. So Chris and Carol and Twyla, stay tuned. We may be doing yet another one in early 21. So, but I'll keep you posted on it. There was some questions, Twyla, since you teach middle school, and maybe Carol, you could help with us too on this. How long does it take you to go through a chapter? High school, apparently about a day, but like a class period, do you require more time than one person here is saying more like 3 days at middle school?
Yeah, I can stretch it out to 3 days. Some are 1, some are 5. It just depends. And then, like I said, when we went to shelter in place, it was 2 weeks because I couldn't do anything new for that first 2 weeks. And that was tough, but I'm glad the web resources were there I could use.
I think it's also, it can go from 2 to 5 days because it depends on how much the kids are into the topic. Like you could spend a whole day, like in a 40-minute class, once you introduce it, just getting more in depth about a topic that they like Twyla mentioned.
Okay, I'm just going to read one thing from the chat here. This is Jennifer Paulson saying, framing the issue, day 1, framing the issue, day 2, historical questions and economic answers, day 3, primary source, and the then and now, and web resources. So that's how she structures it. So Carol, since you're here, and Carol's all the way from Sarasota, Florida. I'm over in Port St. Lucie.
I was going to say, I'm not too far from you.
You're not too far. You're about 3 hours away. I'm on the Atlantic coast in Port St. Lucie, a little north of West Palm Beach. And Carol's over in Sarasota, which is on the Gulf side. And you've been having some wonderful weather over there. We can't seem to end the hurricane season in Florida this year. So Carol, tell us what you like about the book, and and any problems or cautions if you have any.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to speak again. Putting me third is really these two have just really done the book some justice. So I'm going to tell you what I do. My name's Carol LaValle. I'm blessed to teach at a gifted school in Sarasota County. The school is K-12, and I teach 7th grade civics, and I teach 11th grade U.S. history honors. So I have used the book in both classes. Starting with middle school civics, I just dive into, well, first, of course, I do chapter 1 with both of them, because I agree with you. I think chapter 1 should be done before anything, just to introduce them to economics. And what I've decided to do is I already have a textbook in each class. So this is a supplement for afterwards. So for example, we just did chapters 2 and 3, which talks about the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation and all that. So after we did that, I dove into the one that I actually went to the breakout session for, which, where is it? Chapter 5, how did the US Constitution provide a roadmap to economic prosperity? And so I go right in from learning about the Constitution to that, and they don't even realize that I'm sneaking in an economics lesson, which is required by my standards. So that's another thing that I really love about this book. I tell them they need to make one for, government. We'll see what happens in the future. Okay. So next, US history, I also do the same thing. I just slip it into the the end of the chapter. And it's just really easy. Go get the books off the shelf, turn to page such and such. Let's start reading. And just like Twyla said, they get excited because they're getting used to this book now, and they love the then and now. The then and now is such a best practice because they're not going to care unless you can relate it to today. And I'm trying to think, my favorite chapter, I would have to say, and I haven't used them all, but I really into the Civil War. So I like how did the Civil War change the US economy? And because there's a couple Civil War chapters, I just get to pick each time. And I think chapter 9 is probably my favorite because it really shows the students about what it seems, and Mark and every other economist on this will agree with me. Once they know the economics behind an issue, it seems just that they get it so much easier. It's just like they putting that type of math in their head, they start to understand history easier. Of course, the primary sources were already mentioned. And I just love the book. I love the book for the fact that I can just grab a chapter. Let's say that I finish early and I have 2 days left. I can just grab the chapter that matches with my curriculum, and we can do that for a couple days. Also, if I haven't had to have it happen yet, but if I had a substitute emergency and I was going to be out for a couple days or whatever, the book is so well planned that you can literally, the sub can help them read. It wouldn't matter if your sub is trained in economics. They can read the chapters, they can answer the questions. I've used the test a couple times. I love the fact that they have to answer a question and then pick what economic concept it is. And I will end with this very short because everybody's already said enough. I love my poster and I have it hanging up in my room and I want another one. So I'm gonna have to print out another one. And I point to that thing all the time. All the time. So my main thing I love about the book is that it's just so easy to use.
Well, Carol, how nice.
That was like 4 minutes, right? Sorry.
Well,
Sorry.
no, we have a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
So we've got plenty to do. I wonder, I'll confer with Scott. I wonder if we could, or maybe Economics Wisconsin, I wonder if we could mail, we've got printed posters. Maybe we could mail them out. I don't know. Let me look into that a little bit. And because I'm really glad that's how we meant the poster to be used.
Yeah.
Is when you're gonna, you're kind of, well, that's what Chris was
Right.
saying. You're gonna change lenses. And so, okay, let's look at this from an economic perspective. And if you got the poster there, it helps reinforce that switch. It's old fashioned. Tawni must be thinking these guys are Neanderthals. We have a poster that we point to. Let me just get to
Mark, why don't I'll ask Wool to include one or two in the boxes of books they should. Maybe they can do that. I'll look into that for us.
All right. Now I might ask Jennifer Paulson to bring her mic up, because we have a question here. How do we gain access to the web materials? Well, we're referring to the end of the chapter that has web resources. And, it's a printed book, so they're not hot links. But I think what someone's saying, I would like to hear how the middle school teachers use the web resources. And Jennifer, you look like you're doing that. I'm not sure if you're middle school, but could you comment a little? So you could demute, I guess it is. Could you say a few words?
I actually teach in a traditional junior high. I teach 7th, 8th, and 9th. So I kind of straddle both worlds. We do global issues, contemporary global issues is our 7th grade curriculum. And then 8th and 9th grade is our American history section. But I would give the kids the resources. Sometimes I would have them just go wander in groups, give them a resource and have them make up, they like to make up games and for each other. And so that's one way that they that they did it. They also, I would give them all the resources and they would go in and just wander and then pick one to talk about. What did they learn? You know, it's so simple to ask kids that, you know, what did you learn from this resource? Is a really easy question, but it gives us, you know, not only what's the content that they learn, but their thinking. And so, you know, really easy ways just to give them a chance to do some investigation where, you know, they go through that inquiry process. What are your questions that you have? What were they answered by the resources? And so, you know, then communicating their conclusions. So using that inquiry process is really helpful in setting it up. And once you train the kids, they know how to do it themselves, you know, once you give them that setup.
So is the game you're referring to is sort of like, now Tawni's wondering, can you share one of the games in an email, or maybe she means chat, I'm not sure. And Twyla, I think you were going to comment on this.
So what I did was, especially in that shelter in place when we couldn't do any new material for that first 2 weeks, I would send the kids the link that was at the end of the chapter. And I had actually went to the link first and I would go through it, and I'm trying to remember what chapter. It was on transportation. Anyway, I went through it and I would click on, and then there was embedded stuff. So you can click and keep clicking. And I went through and I would find information I thought was interesting and useful. And I created questions to where the kids couldn't just go to the website and answer them right away. So it's kind of like a scavenger hunt. When we met again through Zoom, the kids actually discussed what they had learned and what they liked and what they thought was interesting. And they would ask each other questions based on that website. So again, I let the kids lead the discussion for the most part, but they liked it because it wasn't just going to the website, answering a question. They had to actually look for the information.
Okay, that sounds like a really good approach. Julie, why don't you just demute yourself? We haven't thanked Economics Wisconsin enough. We haven't thanked the Office for the Advancement of Free Enterprise Education enough. Julie, are you comfortable coming on? There she is. And you got a thing in the chat here. Why don't you explain that to us?
Yeah, so I sent this email out earlier, but just in case, you know, you guys haven't checked your email, it's a survey. Just, you know, we want your feedback, what you thought about the event, you know, what were the weaknesses, what were the strengths, you know, what you liked about it. And then the very last question is just your name and your email address where I can send the Amazon gift card to you via email. So be sure to fill that out. That's how I'm going to know who attended, who didn't attend, and all that stuff. Also, if you have not given me an address for where you want your 20 books to be sent to, please do so. I think I have like close to 39 of you, I think, have emailed me that. So there's still a couple that haven't. We just want to make sure, because it's going to be 20 books. It's going to be heavy. We want to make sure that we deliver to the right place. You know, if you don't want it to come to your house, I totally understand. I would have it shipped to the school or whatever. So just, you know, let us know.
Okay. Let's see. I think we've hit. Okay. Oh, all right. I see what's going on. Thank you to our sponsors. Yes, Economics Wisconsin, the Office for the Advancement of Free Enterprise Education, and you know, the Bradley Foundation has been so good to us for so many years, and they help make this possible. And since we've gone the virtual route, we've been able to actually reach more teachers around the country, which is sort of ironic because I still love to do face-to-face. Somebody just said they like hearing all the teachers' stories. Let me just check the chat. Yay, sponsors, says Professor Wood. I love hearing the teachers' stories. Jennifer, okay, I think that we're getting close. And well, everybody, this is where it gets hard for me because when Bill and I put this book together, it was a lot of work. And it was you know, the structure of the chapter, honest to God, so many of you have commented that you like the structure. We were on the phone with Rich Wohl, the president of Wohl Publishing. I mean, it's all an amazing story, really, how we ever hooked up with Rich Wohl and whatnot. And I think that Bill and I just made that up. I mean, it just flowed. Boom, 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 boom. I remember then we said at the end we have to have a now and then. Oh no, then and now. And that just was a very satisfying experience. And you sure make an old guy's day to hear you say good things about this book. I love this book. It's been something I really have wanted to do for years, and I never could have done it without Bill and Tawni and Scott. So I'm really grateful to the co-authors and to Economics Wisconsin and Bradley Foundation and to the Office for the Advancement of Free Enterprise Education. But mostly I'm very grateful to you guys. You've just been great fun to work with. It's good to see so many familiar faces and so many new faces and people from all over the Midwest and even in different parts of the country, from Florida to Wisconsin. So I'm going to sign off. Bill, do you want to say something?
Go Packers.
Tawni? Okay, I'm not sure. Tawni, you want to get on your mic? Well, I see Scott's on, so go ahead, Scott.
I'll just say thank you to everybody for, spending your morning Saturday with us. And do me a favor though, and try to confirm your address for those books. That's my job now, and I'd like to get that done with. So you got to make sure they ship to a physical location. Sometimes we have PO boxes or all kinds of things, but it's going to be a big box of 20 books. So think about where you want that sent, and we'll get it out next week. So you'll probably should be looking for a box soon. But thanks to all of you for your participation, and I hope you enjoy using the book, and I hope your students enjoy you using the book too.
Tawni?
Yes, I mean, thank you. I was chatting with Jennifer in the chat room when you caught me off guard. But thank you, everyone. Be healthy, be safe, stay in touch with us, and keep the ideas flowing. We are here. We're a resource for all of you, and let us know what we should be doing next.
Okay. Yeah, they want a book on economic episodes in civics, and some people want an economic episodes in world history.
World history, yeah.
Okay, take care, everybody. Have a great Saturday now. Thanks,
Bye,
Carol.
everyone.
Thanks, Twyla.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
You.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
Thank you very much.